Hi everybody, I'm Sara Gallegos and I'm back to share another fun Serger Saturday tip with you. I love working with my Serger for quilting, and today we're going to talk about how you can utilize a cover stitch or a chain stitch for quilting. And I mean actual quilting, like putting the 3 layers of your quilt together. Now what's unique about a chain stitch on your Serger, that's a 1 needle stitch, and it's one of the only stitches, or the only stitch, that replicates what looks like a sewing machine stitch, and that it's just 1 row of needle stitching, and with just the 1 needle it allows you to pivot and move around a little bit as you stitch. So it's a lot of fun to play with. Now the size of project that you can work on with your Serger is really going to depend on the size of your Serger. If you've got a Serger that has a larger sewing space, like the one I'm working on here has about 5 inches between the needle and the side of the machine, you'll be able to get more project inside of there to work with it. Now if you're working with a machine that has a smaller space between the needle and the side of the machine, maybe you're going to work with smaller projects or kind of divide your project into pieces, do some quilt as you go, like I shared with you in the last episode. So I want to share with you one little project that I'm working on here where I have been grid quilting with my Serger. So I've basically got a 45-inch piece of fabric rolled in. You can see I've done a bit of quilting, and I've held it together with clips. I didn't have a double-sided fusible bedding on hand, so I'm using a single-sided, actually a warm and natural fusible fleece that I fused to one of my pieces of fabric, or 1/2 of my quilt sandwich. And then I've got another piece of fabric kind of spray basted. So I've secured it with Wonder Clips to hold it in place. Now I'm using the edge of my foot as a guide, and I'm just going to stitch nice and straight down the fabric. There we go. Hold that guy out of the way. Good. Serge off and clip that tail and show you what I've got. So because I've got that extra workspace, I'm able to do grid quilting, and I used, again, the edge of the foot to stay nice and straight, but a lot of machines also have a quilting guide bar. Just like your sewing machine, your Serger may have a quilting guide bar available that helps you to stitch like that. Now what's kind of fun here is you can use regular Serger thread in both the needle and the looper. I have regular Serger thread in the needle, but I put something a little heavier in the looper. So I'll show you what I've got here. If you look at the back, I have this much thicker thread, and when you're working with a chain stitch, that looper thread kind of works over itself in a figure 8, and it gives you a really thick bit of thread. So I'm actually working with a 12-weight Aurifil thread for this, and it's really, really beautiful for quilting. So I've got just regular needle thread on one side, and then I've got my beautiful heavyweight thread on the other. And you can play with lots of different types of threads for that. So that's how you can quilt a large piece. But as I mentioned before, with a chain stitch being a single needle piece, this also allows you to be able to pivot around different parts of quilting. So say you want to do some stitching in the ditch and you're following the natural lines of your quilt block. This is a nice option for that. You just kind of want to think about exactly where you're going to go before you begin stitching. So let's say that I kind of want to follow along my orange here. That might look like a real obvious place where I could do some stitching. So I'm going to just place this under the machine. There we go. And again, I'm just going to kind of bunch this up out of my way. And I can see, because I'm working with a clear foot, where the ditch is in my fabric. There we go. Just going to do a little reposition there. Come all the way down to that intersection. So I've stopped with my needle down. I can lift the foot and just pivot my fabric around. There we go. And then come back in for some more stitching in the ditch. Now there are lots of different presser feet that you can work with. I'm using a clear foot. I like that for quilting because I feel like it puts just a little bit less pressure on the fabric as I sew. Sometimes when I work with a heavier foot or a metal foot, I feel like it's kind of pushing the layers apart. But here we've got some nice stitching. I've stitched down here and across here. Not perfectly straight, you know, camera work, but it's pretty good. So again, that straight stitch allows you to be able to follow the lines of your quilt for stitch in the ditch quilting. And then when you look at the back, because I've still got that heavyweight thread in my looper, you could switch to just a regular Serger thread if you don't want to see that, or you could have something that looks really cool dimensionally on the front and the back. Now, another neat thing about working with this type of a stitch is that it does allow you to pivot and move a little bit more. I'm going to add one more needle in and show you what we can do with what we call a cover stitch. So when you're working with a one needle stitch, that's called a chain stitch. Here's my needle. And when you add a second needle in, you now have what we call a cover stitch. Now, my machine has 3 different cover stitch needles, left, center, and right. I could use the left and center, the center and the right, the left and the right, and have what we call a wide, or I can put all 3 in and do a triple cover stitch. The stitch that you choose really kind of depends on the look that you're going for. So I'll just real quickly here add my left needle thread in. I don't have to make a ton of changes to the machine. When I add another needle, I do want to lift my presser foot up though for threading. That's really important on your sewing machine as well as your serger. There we go. Get right into that needle. And again, you can work with any of those needles that you like, and so I always encourage people, when you're working with your serger stitches, it's a good idea to have a scrap of fabric nearby so that you can run a test and just kind of determine if you are threaded correctly, number one, and if you like the looks of that particular stitch. So I've got to adjust one little thing on my tension here, and I should be good to go. Yes, perfect. So again, I just keep my little scraps of fabric from projects that I'm working on handy because they're perfect for running through your serger just to test things out. Now with this cover stitch, you'll see that I have 2 needle threads, so 2 rows of needle threads. And now that beautiful 12-weight Aurifil is just weaving back and forth between those needles on the back side of my fabric. So again, it gives you a really pretty look. Now I'm going to switch to a different foot, because when I'm working with a cover stitch, it's kind of fun that you can do some curvy quilting. What I showed you a moment ago was nice straight lines of quilting, but I've got a curved foot, and what's cool about this is it allows me to pivot my fabric as I sew just a little bit more than I can with a standard foot. So I've got just a nice little quilt sandwich. I'm going to feed it right in here. If ever you have a hard time feeding your fabric in, because when you're serging, the needle threads kind of wrap around what we call stitch fingers under the foot, and it doesn't allow you to slide fabric in. So all you have to do is pull a little bit of slack in those needles and pull your tail back, and then you'll find that that gives you a little extra room to groove so you can pull your fabric in. Now I'm going to stitch with that curved foot and show you how. And I'm just going to release the little thread tail that's caught there. There we go. With that curved foot, I am able to actually pivot and maneuver my fabric all around. So this is one of my favorite methods for pre-quilting fabric that I will use in a bag or a table runner or a home deck project. So just to show you what this looks like now, we've got those 2 rows of needle threads, and then on the back, that beautiful chain looper thread. Now keep in mind, these stitches are reversible. We've got 2 different threads, so if we just flip that fabric upside down and stitch again, we'll get a really neat effect. I like just doing wavy, curvy. It's kind of relaxing for me. I'll stitch with my favorite threads and turn it into placemats or table runners, or like I said, using it for my own quilted bag. So now on the front side, I have a row of stitching with just my white thread, my needles, and then this here is the looper. Now I didn't have my double-sided fusible, so it's a little puckery, so make sure that you secure those layers really well. But then on the back, you can see that I have my beautiful looper thread and my beautiful needle threads. So a lot of fun things that you can do when you are working with a serger for quilting. I'm going to show you one more neat little sample here. This is actually on a piece of denim, and I used a variegated heavyweight cotton thread. This is actually more of a 6-weight, and just did curvy quilting. You'll see on the back, you can see just barely that needle thread. It's green and it's blending in really well. I know that's really, really difficult to see, so I'll show you the front again, but isn't that pretty? So just a heavier thread in that chain looper, and I worked with the denim upside down. Now keep in mind, when you're working with threads, the lower the number, the thicker the thread. So many of us piece with a 50 weight quilting thread. Aurifil makes one of my favorites. And that 50 weight is that really fine piecing thread that just folds into your seam so nicely. When you're playing with your serger, again, I've got a 12 weight here. That last sample I showed you was with a 6 or a 4 weight. So the lower the number, the heavier the thread, and it really gives you the opportunity to be creative and just kind of play with your quilting. So I hope that you've enjoyed learning a little bit today about how you can use the cover stitch portion of your serger in quilt making. Now in our next episode, our next Serger Saturday video, I'm going to show you my very favorite method for attaching bindings using the serger and fusible thread. You don't want to miss it.